Saul and Pilar Cruz decided to return to their hometown of Mexico City after living for years in the United States. They wanted to give something back to the town that they were from, and so they decided to start a church, and they wanted to start it in the poorest part of town and minister to people that most of the time just get ignored. And so they started a small church out of their house, and they would draw a few people for worship, but it never really had the impact that Saul and Pilar hoped it would have. And they tried to figure out what was going on, and essentially, because Saul and Pilar were seen as coming from outside the United States into their community, they didn't see him as one of them. They still saw him as an outsider. So they still kept their distance. One Sunday morning, they're in a worship service, and a person came running into the house and said, "Hurry, come quick. The sewage plant has sprung a leak, and it's starting to flood the streets, and we need to do something because the city isn't going to be able to come out here for at least 3 days to do anything about it." So Saul and Pilar and a few other members of the church went running out into the streets, and sure enough, they could just see sewage pouring down into the streets, hitting up on the houses, and they knew that it wasn't going to take long before they were going to have a major disaster on their hands. First they tried sandbagging and a few other things, and then they knew they needed to stop the flow of the sewage. So Saul and another engineer dug a pit to get down to where they could shut off the main valve, and they dug and they worked for about 15 hours straight and were finally able to close the valve and shut off the flow of sewage. When they came up out of the hole they had dug, they were covered in filth, and everybody in town was grateful because their community had been spared the disaster that was coming. They made their way back to the house, and some of the church members had gotten some hot water together so they could clean off at least the top layer of gunk off of Saul's body. And they were getting ready to go into the house, and one of the members of his congregation said, "Pastor, can you just call us together and pray?" And it was the first time they reached out to him for ministry. From then on, more and more people started coming to their church, and more people confided in Saul and Pilar with their problems. What was the difference? Because in a time of crisis, Saul jumped into the mud with them. He shared the risk, he shared the burden, he got into the dirtiest stuff you could ever imagine, and he came out helping his people. During this Advent season, we talk a lot about God with us and Emmanuel. And the truth is, the Christmas story is the story about how God enters into the mess of our lives and comes as one of us so that we know that we can now go to Him with confidence and share our lives with Him.